Flour is the foundation of most baked goods, and there are many options to choose from beyond the ever-popular all-purpose white variety. On today's show, I'll share a few of my favorite flours and how to incorporate these into 3 fantastic recipes. A herb quiche with a rye crust, muesli coffee cake, and seeded savory quick bread. All today on Martha Bakes. Fresh milled flour is a powerful ingredient, and learning how to wield it when baking can make baked goods taste even better. Steph Senders is here to teach us about the nuances of this exciting ingredient, which is gaining popularity nationwide. Welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you,
I'm
Martha.
very glad you could come all the way from New York State. Are you a farmer?
I'm not a farmer. I partner with a farmer who grows most of our wheat and rye, spelt, einkorn, corn, all these beautiful grains, with a mill.
But you run a bakery, you grind your flours, you bake your goods and sell them via your shops as well as farmers markets? Or?
We don't actually have a shop. We run a bread CSA. It's like a bread share. People sign up online and they agree to come to a particular spot where we'll bring their baked bread. We make a pop-up bakery for 3 hours.
Wow.
They come get their bread, we fold it up, and away we go. We disappear just like that.
And how many loaves of bread do you make a week?
We make quite a few during the summertime, 1,500, 2,000 tops for these days, but it seems to keep growing. There's a big appetite for great bread.
And I have been told that Steph actually has built an amazing oven.
That's true. It's a remarkable oven. We built a modified version of some old 19th century Spanish oven. It's made out of brick and metal and stone.
Oh, great. And in front of us, some delicious things made with alternative grains. You want to describe what's here?
We have some rye and some spelt over here.
Spelt actually is a form of wheat.
Yes, it is. Yeah, it's what we call a wheat precursor or an ancient grain. It has a lot of interesting characteristics, and some are challenging. It's in some ways easier to farm, but much harder to process. It has hulls that stick right to the kernel, and it means you have to put it through another processing step, so it's expensive to process.
And many people who are gluten intolerant can actually tolerate spelt.
That's true, yes.
Yeah. And this is rye.
Right, we have rye over here, and rye is very, very low in gluten. It holds together by what are called gums, or pentosan gums, they're called. It absorbs a lot of moisture, so if you're using rye in baking, you know right away you're going to bring a lot of moisture to your baked goods.
And now your bakery is making breads that look so delicious. They're very dense, very beautifully colored. This has an awful lot of seeds in it.
That's a German-style bread. It's a farmer's bread, which is just a country bread. It's made of wheat and then whole rye. And from a baker's perspective, when we add rye to a bread, one of the things we know will happen, if we add even a little more than, say, 10% of the flour of rye, we'll see the bubbles in that crumb start to shrink down a little bit. We know right away that the bread will keep better. Just by adding 10% rye will improve the keeping quality.
What about this bread here?
This bread here, so this is 30% rye of the total flour, 30%. And this bread here is a raisin rye, and that's about 20%. It's a little bit lighter because you get more of the wheat gluten, so you get a more open crumb, a little bit softer, less dense, and at the same time you get that beautiful keeping and the depth of flavor that comes from rye.
And ice cream cones.
Yeah, we're doing some waffle cones. We have rye waffle cones over here and spelt waffle cones over here.
Look how nice
these
those
are delicious.
Pretty big ice cream cones.
Hey, start at the top.
Those are nice. And what about the pastas?
We make pastas. We have a spelt pasta and a rye pasta. They're not 100% spelt and rye. We've got wheat in there and semolina.
So these are your freshly milled flours?
Yes, this is a spelt flour.
It's very soft.
It cracks in a different way than wheat or rye. It cracks open. You get the interior comes out in a silky fine powder, and those flakes don't have the bitterness of a whole wheat bran. So if you want to add that to something, and even a pizza crust, you add a small amount and you'll get a beautiful speckle on your pizza crust with none of the bitterness. So this is a rye flour, a stone ground rye.
I have to feel it too, because otherwise...
Yeah. Get a grab
it's
on
harder.
There. Exactly, and you can feel it's a little sandier.
And gritty.
Exactly, and if you look at the bran particles, they're darker and they're almost the same size as the starch particles.
Yep. How long do they last?
Any whole grain flour has oils in there, and if you keep it on your counter in a jar or something, it can become rancid at room temperature. Right. We keep them in a cold area if we're not using them quickly. We go through a lot of flour,
I'm sure
so it doesn't go bad.
This is an excellent introduction to the freshly milled grains. that create the best flours for our breads. And
I think so.
Is this your putter?
That's my cutter, too.
I have one exactly like it from my
Everyone needs one.
No, my great uncle's deli. He had a deli.
That's fabulous.
Oh, this is set right for it. Like
Gonna cut it really thin.
Like a 1/4-inch slice. Oh, wow, look at this. What a beautiful bread.
You know, it's worth noticing that a lot of people, if you say, well, this is a rye bread, and they'll say, well, I don't like rye. And a lot of that is they associate rye with the flavor of caraway.
Right, the
and
Jewish
caraway,
rye breads. Right.
Exactly, and to teach people that that caraway seed has nothing to do with rye grain.
This is so good.
Isn't it good?
Thank you very much for visiting
You're welcome.
with us.
Great pleasure.
You're a font of information and experience, and we look forward to tasting all your products. Thank you.
Real pleasure to be here. Thanks, Martha.
This easy-to-prepare herb quiche with its distinctive crust relies on freshly milled rye flour for the crust's sweet and malty flavor. Crust is not difficult to make. It's 3/4 cup of all-purpose flour and 1/2 cup of rye flour. 1/2 teaspoon of salt, 1/2 teaspoon of caraway seeds, and you can just mix this up a little bit. That's just mixing the dry ingredients together. And add your butter. 1 stick of butter cut into 1/4-inch cubes. Cut the butter while it's very cold to get the cube shape. And this will require very little pulsing to mix the butter into the flour. And this is the fastest way by far to make a crust. And now about 3 tablespoons of water, iced water. Make sure you don't put any pieces of ice into your crust. Be very careful because it'll just make it really hard to roll it out. That looks good. Looks like it'll hold together. And right onto a piece of plastic wrap, just dump the whole thing. If you want to keep your hands free of dough, just pull the edges in like this. This is such a fast way to make a crust. See, it's not a white crust, not by any means. It is a darker crust tinted by the use of the rye flour. And then flatten this into a nice even disc. And this has to be chilled for approximately an hour or even longer. And we have one right here that's ready to roll. Use a little bit of bench flour. And I would suggest using all-purpose flour for rolling. Rye flour is a little slippery. And what we want to do is get this rolled out to a 13-inch round. Keep moving the dough and roll primarily in one direction. When I'm going back and forth, I'm not putting any pressure going the opposite direction. It's always the pressure in one direction. That will enable you to get an even thickness to your crust. And excess flour like that can easily be brushed off with a nice Chinese paintbrush. Properly made, the crust should be easy to roll out without cracking. And we're going to roll this up on our pin. This is an easy way to lift even the most difficult of crusts. So now you want the crust to be tucked under, but you have to kind of even it out. And just use a pair of regular old scissors that should be in your kitchen drawer, marked kitchen use only. There'll be a little bit of trimming. There, that looks good. And then what I do is tuck this under all the way around. And we're going to chill this again and blind bake it, which means pre-baking it before filling and baking again. It ensures that the crust will not be raw underneath a very moist filling. So this you just want to do in a rough, beautiful crimp, 2 fingers, 1 thumb. You want it to be pretty. That's part of a quiche's appearance, that it's pretty. So there, chill that well. So now for lining your chilled crust, now this is really well chilled. By the way, preheat your oven to 400 degrees before you start doing this step of paper lining your shell. And you can make the paper work better if you fold it into a shape like this. This will fit very nicely once opened. And you could cut this into a round if you also like it. See how it just makes it fit better into the bottom of the pie shell. But this is even better. If you crimple up the paper really well, this fits so nicely into your pie crust. It's no longer stiff. It's limp and malleable. And then pour in your pie weights. This is an assortment of mostly beans and lentils that we've collected over the years. We have several big jars like this. So this goes right into the 400-degree oven, bake for 20 minutes. Remove the parchment and the beans, and bake about 10 to 12 minutes more. So the crust is beautifully brown. It's ready to receive the custard filling. 3 eggs, 3/4 of a teaspoon of coarse salt, and 1/4 of a teaspoon of black pepper. And now you add your milk. 3/4 of a cup of milk and 3/4 of a cup heavy cream. You want just enough eggs to set the milk, but not so many that the quiche becomes stiff and rubbery. So I like to strain my liquid right into the crust. And I will just pour this right in like that. And then your herbs. This is about a cup mixture of chervil and dill and flat leaf parsley. And just sprinkle these on top. They will find their place with no prodding or stirring on your part. The recipe can easily be adapted. You can add 1 to 2 cups of briefly sauteed or blanched vegetables to the quiche, broccoli, spinach. You can do zucchini, you can do asparagus. You can also add cheese if you like. But try this first. And be sure not to overfill the crust with the custard mixture. It should reach just the top, right under the fluting. So put this right into a 375-degree oven. Bake for 10 minutes. Reduce the oven temperature to 325. Continue baking until golden and set. That's the custard. That takes about 55 minutes longer. Set your timer. Look how beautiful it looks. Quiche may be served warm or at room temperature. To reheat, you can cover the quiche with some parchment-lined foil and bake it in a 325-degree oven for about 15 minutes. So you could make this early this morning and serve it for lunch hot. Now, I would like to serve it with a delicious Dijon vinaigrette. This is just vinegar, olive oil, Dijon mustard, salt, pepper, and a teaspoon or so of sugar. Toss this up, and this is just a crunchy bib and baby romaine salad, which looks and smells so good. Can't wait to eat this entire bowl. So there you have it, a perfect lunch, a very nice first course too, and also the perfect thing to serve for brunch. Enjoy. Whole wheat flour, freshly milled if possible, and all-purpose flour, combined with sour cream and a layer of fresh blueberries for this very rich and tender coffee cake. To gild the lily and add a bit of crunch, I sprinkle the top with a healthy mix of homemade muesli and honey. Cream in a bowl of your mixer, 1½ sticks butter with 1 3/4 of a cup of sugar. Just get it nice and creamy. Food historians generally agree that the whole idea of coffee cake most likely originated in Northern or Central Europe sometime in the 17th century. When coffee was introduced to Europe, these cakes were a natural accompaniment. German, Dutch, Scandinavian, all those immigrants brought their coffee cake recipes to America. Into your butter and sugar mixture, 4 large eggs. And you should add these like one at a time. Now get your dry ingredients ready for this. 1½ cups of all-purpose flour and 1½ cups of beautiful whole wheat flour. And we need a little bit of baking soda because we're adding sour cream. If you're adding sour cream or buttermilk to your cakes, always add a little bit of baking soda to your recipe. And we have also 1.5 teaspoons of baking powder. Into your egg and sugar now, add 2 teaspoons of best vanilla extract. These are the flours, the baking soda, the baking powder, and don't forget 3/4 teaspoon of salt. So spoon in your flour, and the sour cream is the moisture. 1 cup, and end with the dry ingredients. And we will stir this up a little bit more just to make sure everything is incorporated. Now, muesli, by the way, is very different from granola, and it is served in many places, especially in Europe, as a breakfast cereal. It's usually oats and almonds or dried blueberries, sunflower seeds, and it's usually a dry mix, has not been cooked, whereas granola has more ingredients generally, and it's also been baked in the oven with sugar or honey. And so it's a more complicated mixture than muesli. You can buy muesli cereal, but for this, it's better to make your own. Now the muesli that we're going to use is 1/2 cup of oats, some almonds, like 1.5 tablespoons of chopped organic almonds, a tablespoon of sunflower seeds, a tablespoon or 2 of dried blueberries, and some honey. So here's our muesli. Now we're using a buttered and floured 9.5-inch tube pan. So now half this batter goes into the bottom of the tube pan, and then a layer of blueberries. And we have 2 cups of fresh blueberries. So smooth out that first layer and sprinkle your blueberries all over, distributed pretty evenly over that first layer of batter. And now the rest of the batter, spoon in a similar fashion over the blueberries. Then on top goes your muesli. Your oven should be preheated to 350 degrees and bake about 1 hour and 10 minutes. So cool the cake on a rack like this. I like to put a piece of parchment paper under the rack because I'm going to drizzle a little simple glaze on top of the cake, which can be made very easily with 1 cup of 10x sugar, otherwise known as confectioner's sugar, and milk, a tablespoon or so of milk, and whisk this until all the lumps disappear. Once a glaze is made, use it immediately. Otherwise, it'll just kind of dry up. And just spoon little drizzles. Nice to let it drip down the sides. You can let it dry right here, or you can just put it onto your serving plate. Keep covered at room temperature for up to 2 days, but I suggest you cut and serve immediately. A simple drizzling of glaze is all it takes for a beautiful, professional-looking coffee cake. Enjoy. This is a hearty, seeded, savory quick bread, and it comes together in a snap. Everything can be mixed in a bowl or 2, and we'll start with the dry ingredients. 2 cups of whole wheat pastry flour and 2 cups of freshly milled spelt flour. And if you can't find freshly milled, of course you can use regular spelt flour. So mix these together and then add some baking soda, and it's 1 teaspoon of baking soda, 2 teaspoons of baking powder. So this is basically a quick bread, no yeast. 2 teaspoons of coarse salt, 1/2 cup of sunflower seeds, 1/2 cup of black sesame seeds, some caraway seeds, 2 tablespoons. So lots of seeds. And, oh, I love flax seeds, 2 tablespoons of flax seeds. These can be all whisked together. And we can get this mixture mixed into our milk. 1½ cups of whole milk, 2 tablespoons of olive oil. Does not have to be extra virgin olive oil. 2 tablespoons of honey for a little bit of sweetness. And 3/4 of a cup of buttermilk. So mix that together, and you can add your flour to the wet ingredients. And I suggest stirring this with a spoon. It's a lot easier than trying to whisk it together. It gets very heavy. You could do this in the bowl of your stand mixer, but there's not too much stirring. Just make sure it's all mixed together. And then we have a 9x5 loaf pan, oiled and lined with parchment, and leave a little excess parchment on either side. It'll enable you to lift the bread out of the pan. And then just plunk your bread dough, which is almost a batter, into the pan. I have to tell you, this smells really good. You can pretty much smell each of the seeds. Very healthy, very dense. And press the dough into the pan, trying to release any air pockets. And one last thing before you pop it into the oven, which should be preheated to 350 degrees, are some more seeds. Surprise, surprise. We have black sesame seeds, caraway seeds, flax seeds, and sunflower seeds. The same seeds that we added to the dough itself, we are now sprinkling over the top. And you can sort of pat them into the surface. Bake until a texture comes out clean. It's going to take about 65 minutes because of the dense nature of this dough. Set your timer. So let the bread, once it comes out of the oven, cool, and look what happens. It kind of erupts. But of course, it was filled to the very brim, and it does have baking powder and baking soda in it for leavening, so it will rise. But this is so pretty. I'll lift the bread out. It came right out. Looks so fantastic. And now you can serve this just sliced for breakfast. Lightly toasted would be good. I don't like the ends, so I'm going to cut the end off. And I know who will like the ends. One of my horses loves bread. And one of my favorite ways to eat this bread is thinly sliced, slathered with creamery butter, some fresh cucumber slices, a little bit of sea salt. And once you taste it, you'll see why this bread is one of our test kitchen favorites. I do hope that you learned something new today, and I'll look forward to seeing you on the next episode of Martha Bakes.
I have got an awesome cookie to share with you. I've got butter, I've got sugar, cream together. I'm gonna add vanilla, instant espresso. I'm gonna scoop my flours, my baking powder, and my salt. This is the part where I usually make a big mess. Now we'll add the chocolate chunks. Take a scoop, and you can make these as big as you like. Bake them until they're done, till they look right, till they're just the way you like them. That's a great cookie.